Hello, I'm Beth Turtle, Head of Scholarly Communications and Publishing at the K-State Libraries. In this module, you'll be learning about the implications of copyright for media used in online courses. This introduction will give you an overview of the main issues. Often, various types of media such as audio, video, podcasts, ebooks, mashups, or games are employed in online classrooms. Content may cover films, music, documentaries, simulations, and much more. Distance education faculty often expect the same educational copyright exceptions that are enjoyed in face-to-face classrooms. However, the process of delivering content online routinely raises questions about copyright compliance. As a distance instructor, it is important to address any copyright issues regarding the materials or media you intend to use, even if they are put in a password-protected course management system, such as K-State Online. This involves evaluating whether the materials are in the public domain or are under copyright. If they are copyrighted, then you must decide whether prior permission is needed or whether certain exemptions, like fair use or the TEACH Act, apply. The TEACH Act, also known as the Technology, Education, and Copyright Harmonization Act, addresses the use of copyrighted works that are transmitted to students in online classrooms or in distance learning situations. However, these exemptions are limited in scope and require that educational institutions meet very specific requirements. At K-State, it is suggested that distance faculty look first to the fair use exemption. Faculty working with media in an online teaching environment can do a fair use analysis, as demonstrated in a previous segment of this module, to make a determination about whether a use is allowed without permission. The Office of General Counsel at K-State cautions that it is best to use only the portion of a work necessary to teach your course, as opposed to using or exhibiting entire works. They further advise that if under a fair use analysis an entire work can be used in a face-to-face classroom, then it can also be used in a secure online classroom where only enrolled students have access, such as K-State Online. For example, a professor is teaching a class on popular dance and intends to discuss a line dance called the Madison. He would like to show a 3-minute clip of a group performing the dance from the film Hairspray. Under fair use, the professor can show the clip since it relates to the material being taught in the class. However, fair use would not allow showing the entire film to the class. Whether the Madison clip is shown in a physical classroom setting or made available in a secure online environment is immaterial. Both uses are considered fair use. Faculty that need help converting videos or other media to an accessible online format are encouraged to consult the Media Development Center in Hale Library. You'll find our contact information listed with other resources at the end of this module. For more in-depth information about using media in educational settings, faculty should review the guides and best practices developed by a national panel of experts and scholars and published by the Center for Social Media at American University. These documents also cover the use of copyrighted materials to remix, mash up, or otherwise transform works in user-generated videos and can serve as a guide to faculty and students when deciding whether to use copyrighted works in online classrooms or assignments. In the remainder of this module, you'll find various links and references to more information about this topic. Don't hesitate to contact the Copyright Consultation Service with any questions you might have. Our staff is always ready to help.